The streets of Dar es Salaam are no longer quiet. What was once East Africa's most peaceful capital now glows under the orange light of burning tires and angry voices. The youth of Tanzania, tired, betrayed, and unheard, have filled the avenues where silence used to reign. Their chant is simple: no more fake votes. But tonight the government has pulled the plug. The internet is gone. No WhatsApp, no X, no news. A blackout not of power, but of truth. It began when President Samia Suluhu Hassan ordered the arrest of top opposition leaders Tundu, Lissu, and Heche and banned their parties from the election altogether. For the first time in Tanzanian history, a sitting president is running against herself. Polling stations stand empty, guarded by soldiers with blank faces and loaded rifles. In the shadows, the army rolls in tanks on the same streets once built for trade and laughter. And as the soldiers pass, something unexpected happens. Young people cheer. They wave at the armored vehicles, some shouting for the army to take control. Because in their eyes, the government has already declared war not on rebels, but on its own citizens. So what happens when a democracy turns on its people? When elections become theater and soldiers become the only ones the people trust? Tanzania, the nation once called the heart of African peace, now beats with fear and defiance. This is not just another election story. It's the unraveling of a promise, the collapse of a nation's faith in its leaders. And as you watch this unfold, ask yourself, could this be the beginning of a new African awakening or the death of one more democracy? If you care about truth more than headlines, subscribe, stay informed, and share this story before it's silenced too. October 29th, 2025, the morning Tanzania woke up to silence. Phones stopped ringing. News channels froze mid-sentence. And in that digital quiet, a different kind of noise began to rise, the footsteps of a nation walking out into the streets. In the industrial district of Taran, a group of students carried handwritten posters made from ripped cardboard. "We are not your votes." Within hours, what began as a neighborhood protest became a nationwide revolt. From Dodoma to Mwanza, from the lakeshore to the capital, Dar es Salaam, thousands of Tanzanians, mostly young, jobless, frustrated, poured onto the streets to reject what they called the election of one. The cause was painfully simple. Weeks before the vote, President Samia Suluhu Hassan's government banned the country's two main opposition parties, Chadema and ACT Wazalendo. Their leaders, Tundu Lissu, a fiery lawyer once shot for his activism, and Heche, his loyal deputy, were arrested and silenced. The charge inciting rebellion, the real crime demanding fair elections. For the first time in Tanzania's history, the ballot had only one name: Samia Suluhu. A democracy reduced to a monologue. Polling stations opened under the watch of soldiers. Many of them stood empty. No voters, just uniformed men guarding ballot boxes no one trusted. In the rural regions, entire villages refused to participate. In urban centers, young people stormed the polling tents, burning them as a symbol of rejection. The flames became their vote, their only way to speak in a country that had stopped listening. By midday, black smoke rose over Dar es Salaam. Police fired tear gas, the air thick with both chemicals and anger. On social media, before it went dark, videos circulated showing officers dragging protesters into unmarked trucks. But for every arrest, 10 more people came out. As one young woman shouted into a live stream before the blackout, "If our votes don't count, neither will their fear." The government responded with the same reflex that dictatorships always do: control the information. Within hours, internet providers were ordered to shut down all major platforms. WhatsApp, Facebook, X gone. Newsrooms fell silent. Foreign journalists were escorted to the airport. Tanzania had effectively gone dark. And yet, even in the blackout, voices found a way through. VPNs flickered alive. TikTok clips uploaded through Kenyan networks. Telegram groups renamed themselves Digital Resistance. The youth turned creativity into survival, transforming their smartphones into weapons of witness. In one leaked clip, a soldier could be heard whispering to a protester, "We are with you. We just can't say it yet." That sentence spread faster than any fire, and it terrified the regime. Because it wasn't just civilians defying orders now, it was the army starting to think. In the southern regions, eyewitnesses described columns of the Tanzanian People's Defense Forces entering the streets to maintain order. But something strange happened. The crowds did not run away. They cheered. Some even followed the tanks, singing old independence songs of Julius Nyerere, the country's founding father. The irony was impossible to ignore. The same army created to defend democracy was now being welcomed as a savior from its own government. By the end of that first day, more than 70 polling centers were destroyed, hundreds arrested, and at least 12 people injured, though no one could confirm numbers because the media blackout continued. Still, one truth was clear: this was no longer about ballots. It was about dignity, about a generation refusing to inherit silence. And as night fell over Tanzania, the fires that burned in the streets were not just made of gasoline, they were made of memory of all the promises broken since the first flag of freedom was raised in 1961. Night falls, but the streets of Dar es Salaam refuse to sleep. The air smells of smoke and sweat. The echo of chants "Suluhu must go" bounces off the steel of armored vehicles. For the first time in decades, the Tanzanian People's Defense Forces, once a symbol of national pride, have become part of a drama that no one can fully control. As tanks roll past shuttered shops, something unexpected happens. The crowds cheer. They don't see enemies, they see deliverance. Some wave the national flag. Others hold up photos of Captain John Heche, the military officer who just weeks earlier went on camera defying the government. Heche had warned that Tanzania was drifting away from Nyereri's dream, and for that act of honesty, he disappeared. No one has heard from him since. But now his name is a whisper of hope. Children scribble it on the walls. Heche was right. That night, the line between rebellion and revolution blurs. Witnesses describe a surreal scene: soldiers standing side by side with civilians refusing to fire. A lieutenant lowers his rifle and says quietly, "We are all Tanzanians." It spreads like wildfire. Across Morogoro and Arusha, units begin to stall, waiting for new orders that never come. The regime's command chain starts to fracture. Inside the presidential compound, Samia Suluhu Hassan faces her hardest moment since taking power. Intelligence briefings flood in, army morale unstable. Civilians cheering troops, some officers refusing deployment. Her advisors urge her to act fast, declare a curfew, cut communications, further restore control by any means necessary. And she does. By midnight, a nationwide curfew is declared. Roads are sealed, radio stations seized, drone surveillance authorized. But the problem is not in the streets anymore. It's in the hearts of her own soldiers. The state cannot shoot its way out when the guns begin to hesitate. At dawn, footage leaks a convoy of soldiers escorting protesters instead of arresting them. The video goes viral through underground networks, reaching neighboring Kenya and Uganda before being scrubbed from Tanzanian servers. One voice in the clip, shaky emotional, says, "We protect the people, not the power." That single phrase changes everything. By midday, the world's attention turns sharply toward Tanzania. Al Jazeera calls it the People's Army moment. The BBC reports confusion in the ranks. Washington and Brussels release cautious statements about monitoring the situation closely. But on the ground, the youth of Tanzania have already decided they are not backing down. In the city of Mwanza, a crowd of thousands gathers around a burnt-out polling station. A woman in her 60s holding a candle tells a journalist, "My husband died believing in this country. My sons may die saving it." The emotion is raw, intergenerational, the awakening of an entire nation long told to wait quietly for democracy to work. But now, patience has turned into defiance. The government in desperation deploys elite riot squads from the coast. Helicopters hover over Dodoma. Tear gas rains down. Yet amid chaos, a new chant begins to rise, calm but powerful. Freedom has no curfew. Every crackdown seems to birth 1,000 new voices. In the chaos, religious leaders speak out, urging peace but refusing silence. One imam in Dar es Salaam declares during prayer, "When a nation loses truth, rebellion becomes worship." The message is clear: the regime may still command force, but it no longer commands faith. As night returns, the fires burn again, not just of anger, but of unity. In whispers, in songs, in defiant eyes, Tanzania is changing. The youth have crossed a line they can't uncross. And somewhere behind those walls of state power, the president knows she's no longer facing an opposition party. She's facing her own people. By the third day, Tanzania feels like a nation suspended between two worlds, one still clinging to control and another demanding to breathe. The civil cost of this standoff begins to surface. Hospitals in Dar es Salaam and Arusha fill with wounded protesters, gunshot victims, tear gas burns, and children who inhaled smoke from burning polling tents. Medical workers, many of them volunteers, whisper to journalists that they've been warned not to report casualty numbers, but silence can't hide pain. Families begin to search for missing sons and daughters. Mothers wait outside police stations, holding photos of their children, some just 16, others university graduates who went to the streets believing democracy was worth the risk. A local radio host describes it best. It's no longer politics. It's heartbreak. Across the markets, the ripple of unrest spreads into daily life. Shops close early, food prices soar, fuel is rationed. Fishermen in Mtwara can't reach the docks because of curfews. Farmers in the north watch their produce rot as transport routes are blocked by the army. The economy begins to suffocate under the weight of fear. But the government's problem runs deeper than hunger or inflation. It's legitimacy. When soldiers hesitate and citizens refuse, the ballot power becomes hollow. Inside the parliament building, half empty and tense, ruling party members debate emergency decrees while whispers spread of ministers quietly fleeing the country. Meanwhile, in exile, former opposition members broadcast messages from Kenya urging the world to recognize what's happening as the death of Tanzanian democracy. Activists and students form underground collectives called digital resistance small groups that record videos, map police movements, and smuggle information through VPNs. They are the new journalists working from shadows where the truth now lives. Even religious leaders are drawn into the moral storm. In Dar es Salaam's main cathedral, Bishop Elias Mwashia delivers a sermon that goes viral despite the blackout. A nation cannot pray in peace while its people are beaten for wanting justice. His words echo across borders, shared by churches in Kenya, mosques in Uganda, and African diaspora communities from London to Atlanta. For the first time, Tanzanians abroad begin organizing solidarity vigils. In Washington, D.C., a small group gathers outside the Tanzanian embassy holding candles and a banner that reads, "Let them vote, let them live." Yet amid despair, something profound stirs inside the country. In the working-class neighborhoods of Kinondoni and Temeke, soldiers and civilians share food. Women organize night patrols to protect children from raids, and each morning before dawn, a young man writes messages of unity on city walls. We are the people. We are not afraid. It's no longer about who wins the election. That question has already died. Now it's about who owns the future. For many Tanzanians, this is the moment their nation loses innocence but gains awareness. They now see that democracy isn't just a word on a ballot. It's a living struggle written in courage and consequence. And as the protests spread, one phrase begins to echo across radio frequencies and in whispered prayers: if Traore could rise for Burkina Faso, we can rise for Tanzania. The rebellion has found its mirror. Not in violence, but in memory of nations that once stood up and refused to kneel. As the smoke from Tanzania's streets rises into the sky, the world watches but hesitates. From Washington, the official statement is cautious. We are monitoring the situation and urge restraint. The words sound familiar, almost rehearsed, the same diplomatic script used in every African crisis that doesn't threaten American interests directly. Behind the polished podiums, analysts at the State Department privately admit Tanzania is a partner we can't afford to lose. For decades, the U.S. has relied on Tanzania as an anchor of East African stability, a quiet nation friendly to the West, open to aid, and strategically placed between the Indian Ocean and the Great Lakes. The last thing Washington wants is another example of military defection or popular uprising that questions the Western model of democracy. Especially not after Burkina Faso proved that sovereignty can take a different shape under Ibrahim Traoré. Meanwhile, in Brussels, the European Union calls for inclusive dialogue while continuing to approve security and trade funds for the Suluhu administration. The contradiction is sharp. The same governments that preach freedom are bankrolling the regime accused of crushing it. Across Africa, however, the tone is changing. In Kenya, student movements rally outside parliament, demanding sanctions on Tanzania's leaders. In Uganda, opposition figures express solidarity, calling the youth revolt the mirror we were afraid to face. The African Union, once the continent's moral compass, remains silent, and that silence has become deafening. Even China and Russia, the two powers often blamed for meddling in African affairs, have chosen strategic distance, waiting to see who survives. But in African social media spaces, those digital town squares where censorship can't fully reach, a new narrative takes shape. Tanzania's fall is Africa's wake-up call. In the United States, the reaction of ordinary citizens tells a deeper story. African diaspora communities from Atlanta, New York, and Houston organize vigils and panel discussions. They share footage of protests on TikTok and X asking why America condemns tyranny in Ukraine but funds silence in Africa. One speaker at Howard University says you can't export democracy and ignore it when it burns at home or in Africa. News anchors on major U.S. networks treat the events briefly sandwiched between election coverage and celebrity scandals. But independent voices, black journalists, church leaders, Pan-African scholars begin to connect the dots. Tanzania's youth uprising is not chaos. It's the exhaustion of a generation that wants to live with dignity. And in Burkina Faso, a young president watches closely. Ibrahim Traoré, whose leadership has turned his small, landlocked nation into a symbol of resistance, reportedly tells his cabinet a youth that refuses submission is the highest form of discipline. His words circulate across African forums as both warning and prophecy. Tanzania is not just a national story anymore. It's a reflection of a continental shift where the meaning of democracy is being rewritten from the streets upward, not the palaces downward. To the West, these are disturbances. To Africans, they are signs of rebirth. And as one American commentator on PBS puts it, perhaps what Africa is teaching the world right now is that democracy without justice is just performance. Tanzania stands tonight at the edge of two futures. In one, silence wins, the curfew becomes routine, the internet stays dark, and the next generation learns that speaking up is dangerous. In the other, voices refuse to fade, and the fire that began in Dar es Salaam spreads, not to destroy, but to illuminate. This is not just another African protest. It is a moral reckoning, a confrontation between those who rule through fear and those who believe freedom is not a favor but a birthright. Every chant, every smartphone light lifted in the night sky is a reminder that even under repression, truth finds a way to breathe. But the question now is not only for Tanzania, it is for the world watching it burn. What does democracy mean if the ballots are counted by one hand and the screams are silenced by another? What is freedom worth if the free nations of the world look away when it's being strangled in daylight? History has taught us that no government survives when its people stop being afraid. From South Africa's Soweto to Tunisia's Sidi Bouzid and now Tanzania, revolutions don't begin with armies. They begin with ordinary people who simply decide enough is enough. And while the smoke still hangs over East Africa, a new generation whispers a different kind of prayer, not to be rescued by the West, but to be respected as equals. They look to leaders like Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, whose defiance has become a language of hope across the continent. To them, sovereignty is not a slogan. It's the courage to stand alone if the truth demands it. So tonight, as Tanzania wrestles with its own reflection, the world must choose its response. Will we reduce this to headlines and hashtags, or will we finally listen to the voices that have no microphone, no network, no privilege, only the raw conviction that justice belongs to everyone? Because what's happening in Tanzania is not the end of democracy. It's the beginning of its trial. And perhaps in that struggle lies the seed of something new, a democracy built not by decree but by dignity. If you believe that truth still matters more than power, please share this story before it's buried under tomorrow's noise. If you believe that Africa's youth deserve to be heard, subscribe and stand with those who speak when silence becomes a weapon.